All right, here we're going to look at our notes for 7.6. And again, today we only have one learning target, is I can factor polynomials in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So one thing that's different that you'll notice is now I have a number or a value in front of that x squared term. Okay, so I'm going to label this that this is in 7.6 so that when I'm flipping through my notes I can find it just fine. So let's go to where we're looking at. Okay, so again, here we've got this, and we've got our 4 different examples depending on where our minus sign is, or our negative. Okay, but again, we have now a value in front of this x squared term, and it's something that I can't factor out automatically. Okay, so your first idea, or your first try and guess, will say, okay, so if I'm looking at a, b, and c, is there some greatest common factor that we looked at in one of our last sections that I can factor out first? Okay, that's always going to be your first step, is can I factor something using my GCF first? If not, and we're still left with this, let's look at what we can do. So there's 2 different methods to do this, and they're really the same thing. This one I think is easier, but they both work the same, which is pretty sweet. So now you're going to have a couple that I can walk through with you, and then you're going to have 1 or 2 that you're going to walk through. You're going to walk through 2 by yourself, okay? So this first example, this first method, we're going to follow these steps for the things that we're doing, okay? So the first thing we do is we multiply a times c. And we always want to have our polynomial written in standard form, which remember is our largest exponent first all the way down to our constant. So we multiply that a times c. So here we go. When I multiply a times c in this example, I have 2x squared plus 13x plus 15. I figure since both of these are positive, both of my factors are going to be positive. And this part is not actually all that important, because if we follow our same steps, we're going to get to the same answer no matter what. Okay, so if I multiply my a times c, I have 2 times 15, which gives me 30. So the second step is I find all of those factors of 30, and then I find the pair that when added equal the middle term. So I start with my 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10. There's more and more and more and more and more. But we always want to start with a couple and then move on if we need to. So then I add them, so I get 31 and 17 and 13. Well, up here I see I need this 13, so that's why I've circled here in my same color. Okay, so I've circled that. So my 2 factors become 3 and 10. So now I just rewrite this, okay, as I rewrite it as 2x squared, which is what I started with, plus 3x plus 10x, 3x plus 10x plus 15. So I'm really just rewriting out my polynomial using my factors for bx. Okay, so then I can kind of group these, the first grouping and the second grouping, and then factor each of those. So I've put the first 2 together and the last 2 together. Well, and then I say, okay, what is common in this first grouping that I can take out? Well, the numbers are 2 and 3. They're both prime, so I can't do anything, but I could factor out an x from both of them. So then I'm left with 2x plus 3. So now I look at this second grouping and I say, okay, so what can I factor out of this second grouping? Well, both of these numbers are divisible by 5, so let's go ahead and pull out that 5, and I'm left with 2x plus 3. We know we've done this correctly when the things that are in the parentheses are the same. So here they are. So I have 2x plus 3 and 2x plus 3, so that becomes one of my factors. The other factor is the things that I've factored out, so it would be x plus 5. Okay, so it doesn't matter the order that those are in, that's what we're going to end up with. Okay, so now let's look at another example. So here I have some negative signs. Okay, so one thing we know is the larger factor will be negative, and we know that because this right here is negative. My b term is negative. My smaller will be positive. Okay, so let's just kind of follow our same steps. So the first thing is I multiply my a times my c. So I have 3 times a negative 40, which gives me a negative 120. So then I find all of my factors of that negative 120. Well, I know I could have negative 60 times 2, and here I know that my larger factor is negative. Okay, or I have negative 12 times 10, or I have a negative 15 times 8, and I can continue on and continue on. So when I add them together, I would get negative 58, negative 2, negative 7. Oh, look, that negative 7 is what I'm looking for, because that's my middle term. So now I'm going to rewrite my polynomial using this negative 15 and 8. So I have 3x squared minus 15x plus 8x minus 40. So all I've done is I've taken my b term and split it into chunks, split it into 2 little pieces. So then I can group it. I take my first two and my last two, and I figure out, okay, what is common out of these? Oh, well, both 3 and 15 are divisible by 5, or by 3, so let's pull out that 3. And they both have an x, so let's pull out that 3x. So what I'm left with is the 3 is now gone. I'm left with an x minus 5. So now just looking at the second grouping, I'm saying, okay, what can I take out of here? Well, both terms are divisible by 8, so let's pull that 8 out, and I'm left with x minus 5. So again, I know that I'm right because my x minus 5 is the same for both. So that becomes one of my terms. And my other one is the pieces that I've already pulled out, so it's 3x plus 8. So now let's look at this example 3, and this is something that you are going to do following these same steps. So you're asked to factor 3x squared plus 9x minus 84. So here, since I have a positive with my b, but a negative here, I know that my larger factor will be positive, because this one's positive, and my smaller will be negative. But in reality, if you can't remember that, and you come up with all the possible factors of things, you'll be just fine anyway. So go ahead and take a minute and work on that example. So now let's look at our second method, and we're really kind of doing the same thing. It's slide, divide, bottoms up, okay? And I just recently learned about this, which is pretty cool. So we're going to look at our same examples as before, okay? So here I have 2x squared plus 13x plus 15. So let's follow our steps. So I want to slide a to c and multiply. So I multiply a times c, which gives me 30. I find my factors, again, that when added equal the middle term. Okay, so again, doing what I kind of did over on this example, I find my factors of 30, and then I add them to get my middle term, which is 13. Okay, so here's the difference between these two methods, and they both work the same. It doesn't matter. So now I kind of rewrite them. So I end up with x plus 3 and x plus 10, because those were the two things that I found here. Okay, so I have x plus 3 and x plus 10. Then I have to do step 3, is divide by a. So my a was 2, so I divide both of these things by 2. 10 divided by 2 comes out nicely, right? I know what that value is. That's a 5. Since this first one does not actually, I bottoms up. I take my denominator and move it in front of the x. So I end up with 2x plus 3. So do you see how both ways I did this, I ended up with the same thing? So either way you do it, I don't care, as long as you get comfortable with factoring. So let's look at this method with our second example. Okay, so again, I multiply my a times c, so I end up with that negative 120. I have to factor that, and I come up with the factors that will add to the thing that's in the middle, which here is that negative 7. So then I go ahead in using this method, I just rewrite it. So I have x minus 15, which I get right here, and x plus 8, which I get from right here. So then I have to do step 3, which is divide by a, which was 3, and simplify if possible. Oh, well here 15 divided by 3 gives me 5. 8 divided by 3 is not a pretty number, so I take that denominator and I move it up, so that's the bottoms up part, in front of the x. So again, I get the same answer, doesn't matter which method I do it. So here you'll see down here you have example 3 for both of them. And for me, it doesn't matter which method you choose. I'd really like you to try both ways before you kind of pick your favorite, because we want to get comfortable, but we want to be able to try both of them. So go ahead and try this last example doing both ways, and I'm going to check this. And then when you're working on your homework, it doesn't matter to me how you solve it or which method you choose, as long as you're comfortable doing it that way. Okay, so that was our learning target for today, was to factor quadratics using this form, ax squared plus bx plus c. So now that you've done that, now you're going to spend your time working on your homework, and let me know whenever you get stuck.